Hello, my name is Carrie Smoke, and I'm an apologetics lecturer with Apologetics on Mission. This series is called Missional Apologetics, and today's lesson will focus on how analytical people think. Again, my name is Carrie Smoke, and I'm an apologetics lecturer. Here's an outline of what we're going to be talking about today. We'll discuss scientists' worldview. We'll talk about scientists and religion. We'll talk about religious scientists. We'll talk about understanding your capabilities in witnessing to scientists and how to reach scientists with the gospel. And then we'll summarize what we've learned today. So let's start out here with this picture of the thinker. This is what we're talking about, people who think deeply about things, analytical people such as scientists. From the first week of this series, we talked about the golden rule of apologetics is gentleness and respect, which is found in 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15. It's the idea that when we approach people, any person, to share the gospel with them, we should do it with gentleness and respect. We need to respect people's viewpoints. So let's talk first of all about scientist worldview. Worldviews. Not all people share the same belief about reality. There are different ways of looking at reality. So there are many worldviews out there. As missionaries, as Christians, we must cross cultural boundaries or we will remain unaware of how worldviews differ. In other words, we need to learn about the people that we are going to talk to. We will cross boundaries. Our worldview will not always be the same as other people's worldview. And unless you understand how a person thinks, you will not be able to contextualize, put your message in terms that they understand, your ideas or message. So contextualization is important. We need to speak the language of the people that we're talking to and use words that will help them to understand what we are trying to communicate. So unless you both understand each other's view, dialogue will not be meaningful or productive. It will be up to you to learn their view and how to communicate with them, unless both of you share the same view. So scientists are driven by evidence. That's the number one thing. They want to find evidence and see where it leads and develop theories based upon evidence. Be sure to carefully define terms when you are talking with the scientists. They understand the scientific method, and you also may need to learn the basics of the scientific model and understand what it means to talk with a scientist. Christians are also driven by evidence. We notice that in John 20:26 through 29, Thomas required evidence to believe that Jesus had risen from the dead. So both scientists and Christians can be driven by evidence. Scientists are realists. In other words, they're skeptical. They want to be skeptical until there's evidence to show that this is the correct way to believe. They believe that there is an objective reality that can be discovered, studied, understood, and explained, at least in part. That last part, the explanation, is what I'm saying, at least in part. they will never admit to fully being able to explain something, but they will say that we can in part explain things. But scientists are not free from bias since they only believe in natural explanations. They reject the idea that there are supernatural explanations. So that's why they're skeptical of supernatural explanations. And scientists see science as fact. The idea, again, is using the scientific method should lead to results that could be considered factual. They do not see religion as having any empirical reality. And by empirical, I mean data driven. So scientists look at data, they look at evidence, and they want to find out what reality is. And therefore, they do not see religion as being empirical or scientific. In their minds, religion is vacant in the mind. So let's talk a little bit about scientists and religion. 28% of the U.S. American population are from evangelical Protestant traditions. Only 2% of natural and social scientists at elite universities identify themselves in this manner. So scientists are not representative of the general population in their religion. So that means that we have to understand better, since only 2% would be similar to the US population. Does science lead people away from God? That's a good question. In a survey of scientists from elite universities, the following responses were elicited. Reason number one about this idea, does science lead people away from God? Number one, they were not raised in a religious home. Number two, they had bad experience with religion. And number three, they disapprove of God or see God as too changeable. So for scientists, yes, they would say that it has led them away from God. But here are the three reasons why. So let's talk a little bit more about each of these reasons. Reason number one, they were not raised in a religious home. These scientists weigh religion versus science and find religion does not measure up to scientific standards of evidence. If religion cannot be tested by scientific methods, why study it? That's going to be their philosophy, that it's not testable by scientific methods. They would say religion is not interesting enough to study, first of all. Next, they would say higher questions of meaning and purpose are not important to a scientist. And then thirdly, human life is no more noble than that of a cockroach. So here we have scientists presenting a certain viewpoint, and we need to understand them. We may disagree with their viewpoint, but we need to understand their viewpoint to know how to talk to them. These scientists often have a narrow definition of religion and see all religions as indistinguishable from fundamental Protestantism. So they don't see all the variety. Quite often people will say, why are there so many denominations? Scientists really don't think about that. They just see that all religions are being basically the same, that they are fundamentalist Protestantism. They also do not see how one could both be a scientist and religious at the same time. Well, I can answer that question for myself. I was a scientist for 38 years and very religious. I have attended church basically all my life. So they don't see that. They don't understand how a person like me could be a scientist and also religious at the same time. I've had that question many a time from people that are scientists. So let's look at reason number 2. They have had bad experiences with religion. One scientist who was interviewed said that when growing up in church, the church offered no answers to their questions. This is very sad. We should have answers. We should be prepared to give good, solid answers to those that ask. Another scientist who was interviewed said that their parents physically abused them when they asked questions about faith. They were simply told to believe. This is also a very bad experience, that the idea that they be physically abused because they questioned and were simply told, just believe it. Others, scientists, saw their parents behaving one way at church and another way at home. We call this hypocrisy, where you behave one way at church and another way at home or at work or outside of church. That's being a hypocrite. You're not really showing your true self. So let's look at the third reason. They disapprove of God or see God as too changeable. These scientists are mostly people who are not raised in a religious home. They have no background in religion. And so we'll see that they may have been raised by atheists. Their parents may have had bad experience with religion and passed this on to their children. So let's look a little further. Therefore, in reaching out to scientists, we need to understand where they are coming from. So it may take some time to talk to them, to listen to them, and find out which of these three reasons may be at play in their thinking. Scientists may be hard to reach because of their bad experiences with religion growing up or attitudes that their parents passed on to them. It will take a lot of work to gain their trust. And so, in trying to reach them, in order to witness to them, you need to develop a relationship with them so that they can trust what you say, and you should back it up and show it by how you interact with them by being gentle and respectful and not arguing with them. So let's talk about people who are religious scientists. So there are people that are religious and scientists, and they struggle to maintain their faith. Over the 38 years that I was a scientist, yes, there have been things that I have struggled with and have thought deeply about. I am a deep thinker, an analytical thinker. So, yes, it's true. I think that scientists who are religious do struggle to maintain their faith in God. 94% of religious scientists are evolutionists, but we'll look a little bit more deeply at this as to a reason why 94% of religious scientists will say they are evolutionists. The majority of religious scientists were raised in a home that had a faith tradition. That's the majority, not all. But the majority of scientists who are religious were raised in a home that had a faith tradition. Most of these religious scientists had a personal struggle with science and faith issues. And again, I could agree with that. That is true of me, that there have been personal struggles with science and faith issues. It's taken a lot of thinking and work to come to the conclusions that I have come to. Religious scientists struggle to find common ground with other Christians. And again, this would be true of me. It's hard in a church to find common ground with other Christians because of the struggles that I have gone through in order to come to a solid faith in Christ. So even when a religious scientist fits the typical description of an evangelical, they tend not to embrace the term evangelical. And again, this would apply to me. I prefer to be known as a follower of Christ, even though the church that I attend is evangelical. I kind of shy away from that because of the political implications of being evangelical. So overall, religious scientists are more liberal than the U.S. general population. And again, I would say I'm maybe somewhat more liberal than the U.S. population. Doesn't mean that I don't believe in Christian values. I just see things a little bit differently than the typical evangelical Christian. So that's why sometimes it's hard for me to relate to people who are fundamentalist or evangelical, because I might be considered a little bit more liberal than them. Scientists generally are rarely absolutely convinced about anything. In other words, they are used to being skeptical. This is also true of religious scientists. And again, this has been true of me in the past, of being skeptical and wanting evidence. I would say now I'm a bit less skeptical than I was years ago, but it's an effort to get to where I am today. Religious scientists do see an impact in their lives due to their religious beliefs. For example, their religious beliefs influence how they treat other people. And again, I would say that's true of me, that my religious beliefs do affect how I treat other people. And as I've been saying in this course, we need to be respectful and gentle with people in witnessing to them and not being harsh. So continuing on, religious scientists sometimes create boundaries between the people that they work with who are not people of faith. So what this means is that they may put up a boundary. They don't want to talk about religion. So they put it up a barrier so that they don't have to talk about it. In other words, they are closeted Christians. They do not want to come out and just straightforward say, I am a Christian in the workplace. And again, this is something that I have struggled with from time to time in my work environment. How much do I want people to know about my religious beliefs, or even that I'm a Christian? Is something that's hard to balance in the workplace, because discussions about religion are discouraged, just like politics. But there are times when I have been open about my faith. They may this may be due to wanting to attain tenure at a university and knowing that their faith might prevent them from gaining tenure. Now, I've never worked in a university where I was a tenure track professor, and so this has not been the case for me. but there are those that know that if they spoke up and said, I am a Christian, that it might prevent them from gaining tenure as a professor. When faith is suppressed, for example, trying to gain tenure, society loses people who are the one who are best able to communicate science and faith issues to the broader American society. I am grateful that I have had this opportunity to talk about my faith as I have become more and more open about my faith in Christianity. And I've also been able to teach in my church science and faith issues. And so I feel like I am trying to do this. It's still not easy in the scientific realm, but now that I'm retired, it's a bit easier. Elite scientists who have gained tenure and are religious have freedom to express their faith. In other words, once you have obtained tenure and you're recognized in your field as an elite scientist who is respected by his peers, then expressing your faith is a lot easier. Why? Because you have stature in the community that you are a part of. So their public endorsement of faith is well received by scientific peers because their status in the scientific community. So once you have attained the idea of being an elite scientist, you now have a platform to express your faith, and people will listen and go, wow, this person is an expert and he has faith in God. So that is a big difference. But getting to that point, it's almost like you have to keep quiet in your Christian faith to get to the elite status and be able to speak. At least that's how it's perceived by many scientists who are religious. So let's talk about understanding your capabilities, and we'll talk about different scenarios of how you can relate and witness to scientists. Understand your audience and your capabilities. That's the most basic thing. So example number one, you are talking with someone who is an expert in their career, and you are also an expert in the same career. You can engage them in a conversation as a colleague. You can talk to them peer to peer without any fear of being misunderstood. Example number two, you are talking to an expert in their career and you are an expert in a different career. So you're not talking peer to peer. Listen to them, especially if you sense they can talk over your head. So they're an expert in a career and you're an expert in a different career, and it seems like to you that they can talk way over your head. Listen to them. That will be the most respectful and gentle thing that you can do. And ask questions. This is a great way to draw out what they believe by asking questions. After listening and asking questions, come up with one or two things that you can share with them, and hopefully it will be a seed planted in them. Example number three, you're talking with an expert in their career and you're just an average Joe, a blue collar worker, and you're talking with this expert. Don't be afraid to engage them. Usually they will enjoy talking about their career. So you can get them talking by simply asking them, tell me about what you do for a living. Defer to them. Don't argue with them about what they know. Listening is so important, and defer to them if they say things that are contrary to what you believe. Don't argue with them. Why? Because if you're an average Joe, they can probably put you down. The best way to witness is not to argue, is to listen and try to find a way to talk to them. Again, like the previous one, ask questions and show genuine interest in their career, and connect with them in a graceful manner and say, wow, that's really cool what you do for a living. That will connect with them. And don't feel pressure to know all of the answers. This is knowing your limitations. If they come to you and say, why do you believe in God? You can say, I don't know, or I'm not sure, or why do you believe that God created everything in the beginning? It's okay to say, I don't know, or I'm not sure. It's the idea of knowing your limitations. If you don't truly know the answer, don't try to give a false or made up answer. And then recommend books or videos to them. You may have read this book or watched a video or streamed something online and say, have you ever thought about this? And give them, that information to stimulate their thinking, because that's what thinkers like to do. They like to think about things. And if you can give them a book or a video and have them ask them to think about this, then that's what you have accomplished. You have accomplished getting them to think, and that's what we want to do. So how do we reach scientists? What is the method? They need space to discuss the big questions of life where they are free to express their opinions without backlash. And sometimes this does occur in the church. When people have ideas that are different than us, we tend sometimes to backlash and put them down. But for scientists, if you want to get them to talk and talk openly, you have to let them be free to express their opinions, even if it is something contrary to what you believe. And again, this is being gentle and respectful. For example, having them over for dinner and discussing issues of the day, or taking a hike and talking about nature. That's a great way to have an environment where they are free to talk. In fact, taking a hike and talking about nature, you could maybe learn some things from them if they know things about nature. So that might be a great way to talk with a scientist and get to know them and develop a relationship with them. Show them that you care about them as a person. If there are things that are going on in their life and they share those things, that's great. It shows that they trust you and that you care about them as a person. And that's what we want, because love is what's going to break down barriers. So when we love people, we respect them, we allow them to express their opinions, even if they're contrary to our beliefs. You're showing that you care about them as a person. Then invite them to a rigorous, honest, and open discussion about evaluating the claims of Christianity. And again, this is a way to use their mind. You're now challenging them again, and that's what they are. They are analytical thinkers. And so when you put out there and say, can we have a discussion about the claims of Christianity, and you tell them they are free to express their opinion and they can ask questions, then you have got them on the trail to learning about the gospel. you can help them in this manner in discussing openly and honestly about the claims of Christianity. And as I just mentioned, allow them to speak freely and ask questions. Explain how God has revealed himself in nature, scripture, and Jesus Christ. Allow them to play devil's advocate and ask difficult questions. That is totally fine. In fact, you may learn something by having difficult questions posed to you. If you don't have ready answers, tell them. Do not make up answers. Tell them you need to think about it. They have asked a difficult question, and it's fair game to say to them, I need to think about this and do some research and get back to you. That is perfectly legitimate, and a scientist should accept that. They would do the same thing in a similar situation. So let's summarize what we've talked about today. Scientists are driven by evidence. Scientists have had a variety of experience with religion. Some of them were bad experiences. We need to understand our limitations in witnessing to scientists. We need to know what we can say and how we can say it and how to get them to think. We need to listen to them. This is so critical. Listening is the number one way that you will show that you care about them as a person, and allow them to speak freely and to have opinions that are opposite of yours or different from yours, and affirm them as a person. And as you listen to them, then you can find ways to plant seeds in their lives. Love will absolutely open up a person to the gospel. So care about them as a person. Well, that's today's lesson. Our next lesson, actually the next two, will be answering common objections to faith. There's two parts to this. We will cover several questions and answer them that are common objections to faith. So thank you for your time, and I hope you will watch the next video. Thank you. Bye.